The sad part is that the mass media is a co-conspirator in this whole process. They're not interested in the truth. They're on the wrong side of these issues. Morality plays no role. The truth plays no role. That's where we are.
You know, Doug, I do have to slightly chuckle here because John Bolton, he unwittingly actually did tell the truth. And he's going to lay out this long list of things which is going to somewhat undercut his actual argument. Here we go.
For this 2.5 years, Russia has largely deterred the United States and NATO from providing adequate assistance to Ukraine on a strategic basis. It's been one long public debate after another, going back to, shall we supply ATACMS to the Ukrainians at all? First it's no, then there's a debate, then there's yes. Should we supply the Ukrainians Abrams tanks? First it's no, then there's a long debate, then it's yes. Should we supply the Ukrainians with F-16s? First it's no, then there's a long debate, and it's yes. Now, can we allow the Ukrainians to use ATACMS inside Russia? After a long debate, now it's yes. But it's 2 months until Donald Trump is inaugurated, and I think there's little doubt what's going to happen here. Aid to Ukraine is most likely to diminish significantly.
What he explains there is that, yeah, even though Biden did delay a lot of the stuff, they got the Abrams tanks, the Stryker vehicles, the armor personnel carriers, the ATACMS, the HIMARS, the Patriots, and then the F-16s, and none of it made any difference. And so why do they keep clinging to the fiction that one more thing might actually change something?
Well, there's something else that explains what he's describing, and we need to understand this. There were plenty of people behind the scenes in the intelligence and military arenas who were telling members of the Senate and House privately, and also informing the president and his national security team, that Ukraine could not win. And they were very reluctant to keep giving these weapon systems to people that could not easily assimilate them. We've talked about that before. You know, armies are not shake and bake propositions. Neither are navies or air forces. It takes many, many, many years to develop forces. When Yamamoto agreed to the Pearl Harbor attack, his assumption was that not only would the carriers be there, but the real purpose of the attack on Pearl Harbor was to kill as many of the United States Navy's officers as possible, because he understood that the officer corps in the Navy was absolutely vital to the effectiveness of that force. If you could kill most of those officers, it would take us years to train and educate and produce new generations of capable naval officers. I think people were trying to tell them, Ukrainians can't do this as fast as you would like them to do. It's impossible. And you know what the answer was, Dan? Well, that's all right. We're harming Russia. Remember? Yeah. We're harming Russia. And when people were asked, what's our purpose? Was our purpose to help Ukraine become this glittering example of liberal democracy and flourish as a free, independent state? If we'd been interested in that, we'd have signed up for neutrality. Look at Austria. Is Austria a liberal democratic state? Yes. Look at Finland. Is it a liberal democratic state? Yes, they were both neutral. Neutrality was a healthy experience for both of those states. So they didn't care about Ukraine or its people. They didn't care how many millions of people were driven out, or how many millions suffered, or how many millions were killed and wounded. It was of no consequence to them. They were all about harming Russia. And that was folly from day one, for all the reasons that we discussed. How do you take on a nation the size of Russia with over 140 million people that is sitting on the abundance of resources that they have and has a long and distinguished history of resisting invasion, resisting attack? How are you going to dominate them? These questions were of no consequence. We're harming Russia. Well, we haven't harmed Russia. We've done some damage, but Russia has been transformed by this experience into the most powerful military state in Europe, probably in Eurasia. And people keep talking about China. China has vast reserves of manpower and a large industrial base, but the Russians have a long martial history. China has no long history of invading other people's countries and setting up governments. That's not what they did. They are not offensively minded as a people, never have been. The Japanese are, we are, the Germans are, the British are, but not not the Chinese, but they look to the Russians for leadership in the military sphere. Why? Because the Russians are competent. And they've demonstrated that despite all the problems that happen when any army that has lived effectively in peacetime for decades is suddenly asked to go to war. You knew that from your experience. Everything did not go swimmingly in 1990 and 91. Most units just stumbled in the way they had done it in Germany. We did not. We fundamentally adapted and changed everything we did to accommodate the new environment. We fought differently. That's a tough thing for armies to do, Dan. You don't do it on the fly. And it was impossible for Ukraine to ever build the kind of force that they needed to fight against Russia. And these
and
people
I'll just tag it, double team on what you said there. The only reason we were able to make that shift in 1991 is because we already were very well trained and experienced at every level all the way through, so that it was easy to move that over into a new dynamic. But if you don't have that, if everything's flat and nobody has experience except for what they've been grabbed off the street, they're never going to be able to perform that way ever. And unfortunately, that what to you and me is a basic understanding is totally oblivious to most of the otother people. And that is a big problem for the United States, which, well, let's just hope that could get fixed in a new administration. A lot of people in the West are using lots of just nonsense and making all kinds of ridiculous claims about what these missiles can do and what may happen and force Russia into all this stuff. But somebody who's not fooled about any of this is Sergei Lavrov.
Long-range missiles are going to be applied from Ukraine into Russian territory. It will also mean that they are operated by American experts, military experts. And we will be taking this as a qualitatively new phase of the Western war against Russia, and we'll react accordingly.
And so far, at least what's been reported, that I want to say that we're trying to piece things together, but by reports, 18 ATACMS missiles have so far been fired, and presumably only one of them has actually hit a target. And then some number of Storm Shadow missiles were fired today, and we actually haven't gotten any battle damage assessment on that. But it appears that nothing major has happened so far, so it doesn't seem like Russia's hand may be forced. But based on what Lavrov said there, what are your concerns over the next 60 days?
I think we're going to see the use of large numbers of Iskander missiles carrying a 1,200, 1,500-pound warhead, hypersonic missiles, similar to what we saw, I think it was several weeks ago, if not months ago, in an attack on a Ukrainian educational academy for the military near Poltava. And there were a number of NATO officers there educating and training Ukrainians, large numbers of Swedes that had just joined this fray. They were killed. I think the Russians are going to target not only the weapon systems, but any foreign presence they find on the ground. And dodging a hypersonic missile with a couple of minutes' notice, it's impossible. It's not going to happen. So wherever these systems show up, wherever they identify these systems as being, and they know that they're largely operated by contractors. Now, are these regular soldiers serving in the American, British, French, German militaries? I don't know. I think when this is over, at some point, we'll discover the numbers of Americans in uniform who were killed in Ukraine. We'll finally find that out. At least I hope so, along with British and Swedish and German and Dutch and so forth. But my point is, they're going to ratchet up the intensity of these strikes. And we're also going to see those glide bombs, which have turned out to be very, very destructive and very effective, used more frequently against the same kinds of targets, because Ukraine has no air defense. If people want to know what Europe would look like if the Russians decided to attack, they should look at Ukraine, because we have no such air and missile defense in NATO. We can protect at most 5% of our territory. Who are we kidding? We would be naked in the face of all these missiles and bombs. So look at what the Russians are doing. And now it doesn't take a lot of imagination to figure out what would happen to Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Germany, all for nothing. It's not necessary, but they need to think about that. So did the 3 4-stars that you had on earlier. They're not thinking about that. They could care less. They're to go back to their offices, their homes, live in luxury, and forget all about it. Their paychecks continue to rise, and they get more and more cash in from the usual suspects for saying what they're doing. It's sad, but that's the way it is. But the people who are going to pay for this are going to be on the ground in Ukraine. Lavrov doesn't want this. Neither does President Putin. These are 2 very astute men, very clever, very intelligent. They do not emote. They respond with great clarity, crystal clear statements of what is going to happen. We're going to see a tremendous ratcheting up of intensity. And the other thing I think we're going to see is more rapid movement on the ground, which is why I think we're shipping over these landmines. And what is interesting to me about the landmines is that you'll remember when we were in the Gulf, we were horrified at the cluster munitions that children were picking up off the ground and losing arms or hands or something, or their sight, because they didn't realize that what looked like a little ball was an explosive. Yeah. And it was this tremendous crusade to get rid of those things. Well, we overcame that in Ukraine and have used those there. We also were horrified by landmines. Remember Princess Diana, who went into Africa in many places to expose what was going on there, the terrible damage inflicted on children in Africa. All of that has gone by the wayside because, once again, this has nothing to do with Ukraine. This is a small group of people who've hijacked our government, and they're not going away necessarily on 20 January, who want to harm Russia. That's it. And you've got a portion of that group that is just as interested in destroying Iran, sadly. So I see nothing good happening. And given what's happened in Ukraine thus far, I cannot imagine that the Russians will back down 1 inch from supporting Iran or Syria, or for that matter, the Turks, if they decide to weigh into this.